We are in Chapter 4. This is video number 6, and the book is The Manipulated Mind by Denise Lynn. Finally, the researchers realized what had happened. The dogs were reacting to their previous experience of being strapped down and unable to escape the pain of the electric shocks. They had been totally unable to control what was happening to them. What they had learned as a result was that any actions of their own had no effect, and that therefore they were helpless. That piece of learning was applied to any new situation too, even where they weren't helpless, as in the second box. From this, Seligman came to see the same syndrome operating in people suffering from reactive depression, the type of depression that ensues as a reaction to some clear external stress, such as a loss of a relative or a lover, or being sacked from a job. According to Seligman, people who suffer a series of such setbacks about which they can do nothing learn that they have no control over any of the events in their lives, that whatever they do, things will turn out badly in the end. Therefore, they give up trying. They see themselves as failures and lose all motivation and interest in life, at the same time putting themselves down and wallowing in misery. Seligman put his theory to the test. He subjected students to the unpleasant experience of being in a room where a loud, discordant sound was coming from a piece of equipment. No matter what knobs they turned, they couldn't turn it off, which was as the experimenter intended. On a later occasion, the students were waiting in another room where they did have the power to control the annoying drone coming from the equipment, but they didn't even bother to try. The only way to help people who suffer learned helplessness depression, says Seligman, is to concentrate on showing the depressive person that he can operate on his environment and be effectual, perhaps by giving him simple tasks in therapy at which he can succeed, develop confidence, and then move on to harder ones. The aim is to break the conditioned conviction that nothing ever works. Conditioned helplessness can perhaps be manifested as blunting the feeling. Writing in the Daily Mail on May 14, 1981, after Pope John Paul II was shot, shortly after a similar attempt had been made on President Reagan, Anthony Burgess said that Pope John Paul II should be fired at and hit is no surprise, that there is something profoundly wrong with our age when we are no longer capable of such surprise. Unfortunately, it might be the more amazing if we were capable of surprise when the events of the recent past, which include regular assassination attempts on American presidents and other people in positions of power or fame, condition us to associate such standing with possible violent death and desensitize us to it when it happens. That's what you must expect if you are a politician / pop star, etc. People who come to say as though the threat of violent death were a natural concomitant of reaching public notice. The point was made rather poignantly by Observer reporter Colin Smith after an air raid on Lebanon in July 1981, which left hundreds of people dead or wounded. Smith wrote, "One father objected to my taking a photograph of his daughter, a girl of about 11 who had been brought in to the Gaza hospital with shrapnel wounds. But the world must see what's happened," said the doctors, whose name was Imad. "The world has seen these pictures 1,000 times before," snapped the parent. "When did it ever stop anything?" And that was from the Observer, July 19, 1981. While we unconsciously become desensitized to violence, we can still experience an outrage at a program that deliberately sets out to achieve that aim. In 1975, the Sunday Times published a story in which it was claimed that special units existed to train people to act as assassins. The reporter, Peter Watson, while researching his book, War on the Mind, had attended a NATO-sponsored conference on stress and anxiety. One speaker, Dr. Thomas Narup, from the U.S. Naval Hospital at the NATO headquarters in Naples, spoke about coping with stress and, in the process, let slip that the techniques he had mentioned were being used with combat readiness units designed to train people to cope with the stress of killing. Intrigued as to what this meant, Watson had 2 discussions with Narup, from which he had learned that Dr. Narup was referring, when he said combat readiness unit, to the ordinary commando unit and to naval men who were put into embassies abroad, ready to be called upon to kill if required. He also said, Watson writes in War on the Mind, that men from military prisons were being selected to act as assassins in the embassies overseas. The full story, as told to Watson, was as follows. Dr. Nerut's doctoral thesis had been concerned to discover whether particular films could provoke anxiety and whether that anxiety could be coped with more easily if a man was required to do some ordinary task while watching such a film. The work he subsequently did for the Navy also concerned films, but this time the aim was to find a way to induce servicemen who were not inclined to kill to be able to do so under certain conditions. The method investigated was the screening of films which showed people being maimed or killed violently, with the aim of desensitizing the men to such acts. Amongst the men selected by U.S. naval psychologists for this training were convicted murderers from military prisons. Watson described the so-called stress reduction training as it was described to him. Men selected are taken for training to the Navy's hospital in Naples or to the neuropsychiatric laboratory in San Diego, California. The men are taught to shoot, but also given a special type of Clockwork Orange training to quell any qualms they have had about killing. It works like this. The men are shown a series of gruesome films which get progressively more horrific. The trainee is forced to watch by having his head bolted in a clamp so he cannot turn away. And a special device keeps his eyelids open. One of the first films shows an African youth being crudely circumcised by fellow members of his tribe. No anesthetic is used and the knife is obviously blunt. Nice. When the film is over, the trainee is asked irrelevant questions such as what was the motif on the handle of the knife, or how many people were holding the youth down. In another, camera follows the movements of a man at work in a sawmill, slicing his way through planks of wood. The film shows his thrusting movements until he slips and cuts his finger off. Physiological measures are taken to ensure that the men really do learn to remain calm while watching. And we will pick this up in the next video. This was number 6. We are in chapter 4, and the book is The Manipulated Mind by Denise Wynn. And I will see you in the next video. Hang with me.